democracy, but to the police officers who so bravely served us that day. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Mississippi reserves. Gentleman from New York continues to reserve.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I recognize for 1 minute the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Rice.
Gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Rice is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 3233, the National Commission to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol Complex Act. This cannot be said enough. January 6th was an act of domestic terrorism. An armed mob of insurrectionists stormed the Capitol intending to murder the Speaker, the Vice President, and members of Congress. We cannot let our friends on the other side of the aisle whitewash the events of that day. We cannot let them gaslight the American people by calling January 6th an ordinary tourist visit. The 9/11-style commission we are proposing in this bill will issue a full report on the facts and provide recommendations to prevent future attacks. I truly appreciate Chairman Thompson and Ranking Member Katko for negotiating this bill in good faith. And let me say to my friend, the Ranking Member, Mr. Katko, I want to thank you for actually recognizing the events of January 6th and working to find a bipartisan path forward despite the opposition in his own party. That is a true act of courage and being a true American. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New York yields back. Gentleman from Mississippi reserves. Gentleman from New York
We reserve, Mr. Speaker.
reserves. Gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to recognize the gentlelady from New York, from Florida, gentlelady, Ms. Dimmons.
For 1 minute.
From 1 minute.
The gentlewoman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the insurrectionists attacked this very building we are standing in right now. The violent mob attacked, bear sprayed, and beat down the police officers who protect us every day. 140 officers were injured, and we need to care about that. Some have died, and they deserve better. Mr. Speaker, accountability and truth are the foundation upon which all of our rights and freedoms exist. We need answers, and this commission will give them to us. We need accountability, and this commission will pave the way for full accountability. We need an independent commission, and a vote against it is a vote for a cover-up. Choose ye this day whom you will serve, our democracy or the big lie. History will remember us. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentlewoman from Florida yields back. Gentleman from Mississippi reserves. Gentleman from New York.
Mr. Speaker, we reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Barragan.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of the National Commission to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol Complex Act. So many questions have surfaced since the attempted insurrection from January 6th. But one question encompasses everything. What happened? A truth-telling commission will set the record straight about the January 6th uprising, its causes, and potential remedial measures. This is about a fact-finding and truth-telling mission. It was the very absence of these two things that helped bring the insurrection on January 6th. We can't move on until we look back and make sure we know what happened, why, and make sure it never happens again. On behalf of fallen Capitol Police Officer Sicknick, the men and women of the U.S. Capitol Police, the Congressional and Capitol Hill staff that keep our offices running, and the American people, we must uncover the truth. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman from California yields back. Gentleman from Mississippi reserves. Gentleman from New York.
Mr. Speaker, we reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Virginia, Ms. Luria.
The gentlewoman from Virginia is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, like all of us, I watched with horror as our Capitol was overrun on January 6th by those seeking to overturn a free and fair election. As a 20-year Navy veteran, I swore an oath multiple times throughout my career to support and defend our Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. As members of Congress, we swear the same oath, and we swear this oath not as a member of a political party, but as Americans. There's no carve-out for political expediency. I implore every member of this body to uphold their oath and vote in support of this bipartisan commission. The American people deserve to understand exactly what happened that day in January. I urge my colleagues not to turn this into a partisan litmus test, not to pit Republican against Democrat, and not to perpetuate the big lie. Finding the truth should not be controversial or a question of partisanship. This is about our shared future, the future of this Congress, and the future of democracy. We must do this together. I urge an aye vote, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentlewoman yields back. Gentleman from Mississippi reserves. Gentleman from New York.
Mr. Speaker, we reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to include in the record a listing of national security, military, and elected officials, former members of Congress, U.S. attorneys, diplomats, all who have specific expertise in this matter before the body today. I asked unanimous consent for it to be entered into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I also have for entering into the record a joint statement from Governor Tom Kean and former Congressman Lee Hamilton in support of this commission.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I also have for inclusion into the record from Project Democracy, Ian Besson, the Executive Director.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, we've had a number of my colleagues come before us encouraging this body to support this commission and this legislation. They've spoken valiantly in support of it. They have put their hearts and soul into making sure that it is correct and proper. And I'm happy again to share with my colleague from New York. I appreciate working with him. I appreciate the ability to work out our differences. And I think it should be part of the role model for future legislation in this body. But at this point, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to yield to the leader of the United States House of Representatives, Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I thank him for his great leadership working with Ranking Member Katko on bringing this bipartisan legislation to the floor for a bipartisan commission. Let's talk about where we are. Here we are in the capital of the United States. The dome of the U.S. Capitol has always been a beacon of democracy and hope to America and to the world. Under this dome, our nation has abolished slavery, secured equal protections for all, ended a civil war, enfranchised women, established Medicare and Medicaid, voting rights, civil rights, and met the needs of the American people. Under this dome, school children learn about their country's history and what we are doing to advance their future. They come here, they see us honor those who have contributed to the success of our country. Washington, Lincoln, so many, Jefferson, etc. But they know that our founders, those patriots, wanted us to be working for a better future as we honor our history. Under this dome, again, when children learn about our country's history, they learn also about what we are doing for their futures. Legislators pass law, press engages with our democracy, reporting on it. Staff and workers enable all of this to happen. This dome is a symbol of the determination of America, but this was not always so. Let us recall that the dome of the Capitol was built during the Civil War, as our country was riven by a brutal conflict. At the time, many said the iron and steel used for construction were needed for the war effort. They urged the president not to continue the work on the dome, but President Lincoln said no. He knew that our country needed a symbol of strength and unity, a reminder of the shared ideals and common purpose that built our nation, a beacon of hope to guide us through times of darkness. And he knew that the work must continue as a sign of our strength and that of the unity of our country. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, on January 6th, in the days, weeks, and months after, the Capitol dome was once again such a beacon. Would we prevail? January 6th was the day called for in the Constitution to validate the presidential election. It was not just another day in the life of Congress. That day, one of the darkest days in our history, our temple of democracy was under assault by insurrectionists. The gleeful desecration of our Capitol resulted in multiple deaths, physical harm to over 140 members of law enforcement, and terror and trauma amongst staff, workers, and even members. The insurrection was called for to impede our constitutional mandate. But the Congress returned to the Capitol that night to accomplish our purpose. We agreed in a bipartisan way that day that we would return to the Capitol. And that sent an important signal to the world. The insurrection called for people to impede our constitutional mandate, but we returned to the Capitol. Thanks to the courage of the Capitol Police, members and support workers, we showed the country and indeed the world that we would not be diverted from our duty, that we would respect our responsibility to the Constitution of the United States. We take that oath to protect and defend the Constitution. Again, in a bipartisan way, we agreed to come back to the Capitol. Today, over 4 months later, many questions regarding the circumstances of this assault on our democracy and the response to it remain. It is imperative that we seek the truth of what happened on January 6th. And to do that, Congress must, in a spirit, I believe, in bipartisanship and patriotism, establish an independent, bipartisan 9/11 type commission. Today, thanks to the leadership of Chairman Bennie Thompson and Ranking Member John Katko, legislation to create such a commission is on the House floor. It's important to note, Mr. Speaker, that this is happening 4.5 months after the January 6th insurrection. My colleagues, do you know, but many of you were not here at the time, but legislation establishing the 9/11 Commission was not signed into law. 9/11, mind you, 9/11/2001 was not signed into law until the end of November 2002, over 14 months after the attacks. So people have been saying, how come we don't have a commission? Well, it takes time to build the bipartisanship, come to agreement. And let us hope that the leadership that Mr. Thompson and Mr. Katko have demonstrated will be leadership that we will follow, that we will continue in the most bipartisan way in order to seek the truth. Today, after 4 months later, many questions regarding the circumstances still exist. This commission is designed to be impartial and experienced. The legislation requires that the commissioners be, quote, prominent United States citizens with national recognition and significant depth of experience. It also indicates that they should not be members of Congress or members elected in other capacity. Commissioners will be appointed from the highest echelons of government service, law enforcement, civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy, the armed forces, intelligence, counterterrorism, cybersecurity, technology, and law. The commission will be, again, bipartisan and bicameral, with commissioners appointed by the majority leaders and majority and minority leadership in the House and Senate, and will be actionable and effective, culminating in a final report on the facts and causes of January 6th, along with recommendations to prevent further attacks on our democratic institutions. I heard you earlier, Mr. Chairman, acknowledge the support and endorsement of the previous chairs of the 9/11 Commission, Governor Kaine, and Chairman in the Congress, Lee Hamilton, co-chairs of the 9/11 Commission. They also had written to us earlier on about the need for such a bipartisan commission, but they also wanted not only to find out the truth so this doesn't happen again, but also to reinforce our commitment to democracy and take us on a path that is better and more unifying. And that's a responsibility we have, and that is a hope that I have emerging from this debate, this vote today, that we will be able to have a strong bipartisan vote that takes us down a path more unifying for our country. We have this opportunity. My colleagues, the press says to me, why don't you just go do your own task force, your own select committee and to investigate this? You have the votes, you have the subpoena power, you have this or that. I said, I don't want to do that. We want this to be, as it is shaped, bipartisan, with shared responsibility, shared staff, in a way that the public will have respect for the outcome. To that end, 140 national security leaders had called for such a commission, writing, and this is what they've said, the events of January 6th exposed severe vulnerabilities in the nation's preparedness for preventing and responding to a domestic terrorist attacks. The immediate security failings that permitted such a lethal breach of the Capitol complex by armed extremists raise serious questions and demand immediate solutions. A failure to deploy the full suite of available tools to fully understand January 6th and address its causes will leave the Capitol and the nation vulnerable to future attacks. These are a list of nonpartisan, 140 Democrats, Republicans. I don't even know what party some of them are. Without objection, I would like to submit their statement for the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, so ordered.
After the bipartisan agreement on this commission was reached, the respected bipartisan chairs of the 9/11 Commission, Thomas Kean and Lee Hamilton, endorsed it, as was mentioned by the chairman, as I referenced earlier. I want to repeat, because I think it bears repetition, we very strongly urge House members to support H.R. 3233, the Bipartisan National Commission to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol complex. That bill would create a 9/11-style commission to investigate the January 6th assault on the U.S. Capitol. That was a dark day in American history, one of the darkest. As chairman and vice chairman of the 9/11 Commission, unity of purpose was key to the effectiveness of this group. We put country above party without bias, the events before, during, and after the attack. We sought to understand our vulnerabilities in order to prevent future attacks or future acts of terrorism. The chair and vice chair went on to say, today democracy faces a new threat. The January 6th attack on the United States Capitol was one of the darkest days in the history of our country. Americans deserve an objective and accurate account of what happened. And they said, Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Governor Kaine, as we did in the wake of 9/11, it's time to set aside partisan politics, come together as Americans in common pursuit of truth and justice. As I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, the Capitol of the United States has always been a glorious beacon of democracy for the American people and for the world. This legislation is about something larger even than the Commission, vital as the Commission is. This legislation is about our democracy, about ensuring that the Capitol Dome remains a symbol of freedom, about preserving America's role as an emblem of resilience, determination, and hope to the world. Indeed, creating this commission sends a resounding message to terrorists both at home and abroad. The commitment of the United States Congress to the Constitution and to the American people is unshakable. In establishing the truth of January 6th, this commission will protect our temple of democracy and our democracy itself, and it will ensure that such an attack shall never happen again. Can you just not wait, my colleagues, for a time very soon when children come here to learn, where the press can cover in a more open way, where the American people can come into the people's house? That's what this body this chamber has been called, the people's house. Come to witness the debate that affects their lives. And whatever our disagreement about policy, that they are assured that we are unified in our commitment in honoring our Constitution, respecting the institution in which we serve. At that, I urge a strong bipartisan vote for H.R. 3233 to establish the National Commission to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol complex. And I do so with the greatest appreciation and respect to Chairman Bennie Thompson and to Ranking Member Katko, and hope, again, that the spirit of bipartisanship that they engendered in bringing this legislation to the floor will only grow as we go forward with the Commission and with its recommendations. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
From Mississippi reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank the Speaker for her comments. And I want to just reiterate for everyone to understand, the way that Mr. Thompson and I crafted this bill, we crafted it in such a manner to make sure that it would be depoliticized entirely. There's an equal number of members on both sides, appointed by both sides. They have equal subpoena power. They can't subpoena one person without the other person on the other side of the aisle agreeing. They have to hire staff together, all those things. And I want to make sure people understand we did this for a reason, because that's exactly what made the 9/11 Commission successful, and it made it effective. And someone who was in federal law enforcement for 20 years before I took this job, I can tell you that our country is infinitely safer because of what the 9/11 Commission did. We are much stronger against terrorism, and we share information in much better ways than we ever did. For example, the Joint Terrorism Task Forces, which are all over this country. So I ask my colleagues to consider the fact that this commission is built to work, and it will be depoliticized, and it will get the results we need. And because of the Capitol itself and the Capitol police officers, we'd be better off for it. I yield back. Oh, excuse me, Mr. Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentle lady from Georgia, Ms. Green.
The gentlewoman from Georgia is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to this bill and to the January 6th Commission. I do so as a member of Congress because I believe this institution's duty is to serve the people of this country and not itself. In this past year, we have witnessed violent riots in the American cities all over this country. We have witnessed tremendous damage. Minneapolis city officials estimate 700 buildings were damaged, burned, or destroyed, including 360 local businesses. There has not been a commission launched to study the reasons why that happened. There has not been an investigation to stop the BLM Antifa riots that have hurt innocent people, attacked government buildings, federal courthouses, taken over police precincts, created autonomous zones in the city of Portland, and done so much damage to people all over the country. Studies show 570 protests in 220 different U.S. locations turned violent over the summer. The $1 billion plus riot damage is estimated to be the most expensive in insurance history. It resulted in up to $2 billion of damages in 20 cities across the U.S., mostly concentrated in L.A., Detroit, Miami, D.C., and New York. As a person that was a victim of the January 6th Capitol attack, I can tell you I'm against the violence that happened that day, but I do not believe a January 6th commission will achieve any resolution because we have already had our Department of Justice arrest 445 people with 100 more to be arrested soon. There's also reports of people being held for 23 hours in solitary confinement. That should not be happening. These people haven't even had a court date yet. You see, what's going to happen with the January 6th commission is the media is going to use this to smear Trump supporters and President Trump for the next few years and cover up the damage, the real damage that's happening to the people of this country, which is tearing down our economy, ripping our borders wide open, and hurting this country. I yield the remainder of my time.
Gentleman yields back, balance of time. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to recognize the gentleman from Maryland, the Majority Leader of the Democratic Party, Mr. Hoyer.
I thank the gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 1 minute.
For 1 minute.
For 1 minute. Gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 1 minute.
Or as I call it, the magic 1 minute.
It is.
I thank the chairman for yielding. I thank the chairman for his work. I've been here a long time. It's my 40th year in the Congress of the United States. I came at the same time Ronald Reagan was elected President of the United States. It was clearly a time of difference in the House and in the country between Republicans and Democrats, but it was also a time when, frankly, the John Katkos of the Congress were in the majority in the Republican Party. And by that I mean, Mr. Speaker, people who wanted to work together to get to a result that, while not perfect for either side, were good for the country. And so while I thank Mr. Thompson and for the hard work he's done, I thank Mr. Katko as well for doing what Americans expect us to do, to come together, looking at a challenge to our country and to our people, and coming to a decision to resolve those challenges and those problems. That's what Mr. Thompson and Mr. Katko have done. And indeed, I think this is in some ways the best of days, in some ways the worst of days. Because we have seen today two Republican leaders turn what ought to be a non-political issue, an issue with reference to a unique event, not just a demonstration that's occurred, and I grew up in the 60s. Whether it was civil rights, Vietnam, a lot of demonstrations. But the Capitol of the United States was not attacked. It was not invaded. It was not breached. The work of the Congress of the United States was not stopped because people were trying to get through the door, with some members trying to stop them, who then said, these are just tourists. Sad, because what the minority leader in the Senate and the minority leader in the House said, exactly what Mr. Katko pointed out. They wanted a commission that was even, as 9/11 commission was even, so that both sides would have an equal voice. And so what was the resolution that Mr. Thompson and Mr. Katko attained? Equal division, equal voice. Not only equal voice in terms of numbers, but, for instance, one of the things that was controversial was about subpoenas. And so Mr. Thompson and Mr. Katko arrived at a resolution that said both sides have to agree, or alternatively, the committee can agree. and in light of the fact that the committee is evenly divided, it would obviously have to be a bipartisan request for subpoenas. Now, what we didn't agree on was the distraction and the dissembling. Let's look at let's look at this corner. Don't look here. Let's look at this corner. Don't look here. Let's look at that corner. Don't look there. Don't look at just the invasion, the insurrection that occurred on January 6th. Look at everything else, because maybe we can confuse the issue enough that we'll lose sight of the insurrection on January 6th. We are not to do that. I've been here a long time, but I also know the history of the House, and I do not know of any other instance that is analogous to January 6th. Not one. 1812, of course, there was a similar invasion, but it was from a foreign enemy. It was not the enemy within. I said that on the floor that morning as we finished the business of the House, notwithstanding the insurrection. Mr. Speaker, it's vital that Congress establish a bipartisan, independent commission to investigate January 6th. Not some other date. That does not absolve any wrongdoing anywhere, anytime. But it says that this unique insurrection is a danger to our democracy, not to Republicans and Democrats, to our democracy, to our Congress, to the People's House and the United States Senate, which was occupied. At least this House was not occupied. But members were terrified, and work was stopped, and democracy for a short period of time was overtaken by armed, violent insurrectionists. And certainly each one of us ought to be very concerned about getting at the bottom of why did that happen? How did it happen? How can we stop it from happening again? What are the resources that we need? And yes, who was responsible? Some perhaps are going to vote against this because that's what they fear. The 9/11 Commission, as Mr. Katko pointed out, made America safer. It made this institution safer. It made our law enforcement more acutely aware of the failures that led to 9/11. I hope this commission does the same. And it was right, and I've talked to numerous Republicans who tell me they think it was right, that we focused on January 6th. Don't be distracted. Don't cover up or make more lacking in clarity by trying to deal with every problem that we may have. Focus on January 6th. Together, Mr. Katko and Mr. Thompson negotiated a bipartisan agreement to move forward with such a commission based on input from Democrats and Republicans. There are going to be a significant number of Republicans that vote for this bill. Unfortunately, the truth has been a victim over the last couple of weeks. It was okay for Liz Cheney to tell the truth once, But when the former president of the United States kept telling a lie, and she said, "That's a lie," each time that he said it, well, that was not appropriate. And so she was removed. But the truth was removed with her. See no evil, hear no evil. The commission, as a result of the ranking member Katko's participation in these discussions, will be equally composed, as I said. It will have subpoena power that will be shared by both sides. And I was pleased that we reached a bipartisan agreement. And sad for this institution, for this country, for the American people, who must think, can't you agree on anything? The minority leader got what he asked for. And yet he won't take yes for an answer. Trump does not want this commission. That can be my only explanation. Throughout my career, both in the state Senate for 12 years, as president of the Senate, and here in this body for 40, I think I'm known on the other side of the aisle as somebody you can work with. I hope that's the case. Because I think that's the way Americans want us to work. President Trump opposes this commission. I'm not sure why. It's deeply disappointing that there is a division among Republicans about whether to support the ranking member who worked hard to get to this place and got what the minority leader asked for, except for the distraction, except for the dissembling. He didn't get that, but he got everything else. Mr. Speaker, I hope my Republican colleagues will think not about their politics, not about the former president, not about themselves. I hope they will think of the country, of this Congress, of this House. And as they do so, I hope they say to themselves, we will vote for this legislation. What if George Bush had said we shouldn't have a 9/11 commission? Perhaps out of fear that somehow the administration would have been perceived as being responsible for 9/11. They weren't. Wouldn't all of us said, what are you talking about? That we're not going to have a commission to see how we can protect the Capitol and why this Capitol was stopped from doing the work of our democracy. This legislation is going to pass. It's going to pass on a bipartisan basis, and I want to thank Mr. Katko for having the courage and the integrity to stand up fighting for what the minority leader asked for. That's Mr. Thompson, the funny thing about this. I hope senators will think long and hard about rejecting this bipartisan compromise to move forward to protect our democracy and to lift it up as the beacon that it has been and needs to be, not only for our own citizens, but for all the world. How sad that day was as the world watched, as TV showed them, America's citadel of democracy and of freedom invaded by its own citizens. Vote yes. it's the right thing to do. I yield back.
Gentleman from Maryland yields back. Gentleman from Mississippi reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I had intended not to speak. But the careful mask of bipartisanship seems to have faltered here at the last, with the majority leader's attacks on the minority leader, who has not spoken, and the leader in the Senate, minority leader in the Senate, for comments he's made in public, but not in debate. And so what was an image of bipartisan cooperation has now become one more partisan attack. And it caused me to believe that it was important to stand up and say this. How can you have a bipartisan commission with an all-Democrat staff? How do you do that? And why is it that there is no willingness to look into all of the riots and the arson and the violence and the burning? If we're concerned about the danger that police officers were in on January 6th, and certainly they were, then why don't we have that concern for the dangers, the violence, the injuries, the deaths that have been faced by police officers across this country? Why is one form of political violence equivalent to 9/11 when a blind eye has been turned by this Congress, or at least by the majority in this Congress, to that same phenomenon across this country for a year? Where is the inquiry into that? When the images are raised, the lurid images about insurrection, let me just say this. If it was an insurrection, it was the worst example of an insurrection in the history of mankind. It was a riot, it was a mob, and it was significant, and it was troublesome. But this is not bipartisanship, and I fear that the gentleman from New York may find that he has been played.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Well, I'm not going to argue with the previous speaker. I just said read the bill. And if you read the bill, you'll understand it is a bipartisan bill. It's not a partisan bill. It's absolutely bipartisan. The staff will be picked just like the staff was picked for the 9/11 Commission. It's just like the earlier bill the ranking member talked about at the Rodney Davis bill. I mean, it's easy. So we look, Mr. Speaker, at this issue because the world saw what happened on January 6th. And it's clear that we've put together a bipartisan bill for the good of the country. And it's in that spirit that we're here today. Mr. Speaker, how much time do we have?
Gentleman from Mississippi has 6 minutes remaining. Gentleman from New York has 15 minutes remaining.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from New York, the chair of the Government Reform and Oversight Committee, Ms. Maloney, for 2 minutes.
The gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the chairman for yielding and the ranking member for their extraordinary leadership, for doing the right thing, and for working to make this country safer and stronger. Like my friend on the other side of the aisle from North Carolina, didn't intend to speak either. But this is so important. As a New Yorker, I was closely involved in supporting the work of the 9/11 Commission. It, too, like January 6th, was one of the darkest days in the history of our country. and we needed answers on how such a horrible thing could happen. Almost 3,000 people were murdered just because they went to work that day. Many things needed to be answered, and this body came together. We were united. We were determined. We passed the commission. We had two outstanding leaders, Governor Keene and Lee Hamilton. They did everything together. They issued a report that sold more copies than Harry Potter. I had nominated it for a National Book Award, and it laid out what happened so clearly from their joint investigations. And more importantly, it told us what to do about it. They had a series of recommendations to make this country safer. This body worked together and enacted most of them, and it did make this country safer. In fact, the law enforcement in my city, I get periodic reports on attempts to hurt us and how the reforms and the programs we put in place, how they're helping us, making us stronger, and protecting us better. We need this January 6th commission for the sake of America. Let's stop fighting long enough to work together to help our country understand what happened. Why did it take 4 hours for the National Guard to respond? In New York, they would have been there in 10 minutes. Why didn't you respond to all of the news reports about what was happening? We need answers. Let's come together and work together and get them. A 9/11 commission, a January 6th commission, I urge for the sake of the country, everyone should vote for it.
Time has expired. Gentleman from Mississippi reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomert.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the Speaker and the ranking member. Look, things have changed a lot since the 9/11 Commission, because back then we did not have a problem on either side of the aisle condemning anti-Semitic remarks. Now one side has a problem doing that. Back then we didn't have, we had never in the history of Congress had one party commit what is arguably a felony up to 20 years in prison by preventing an ongoing session of Congress, the exact charge, 1512, 18 U.S.C., that is being alleged against people that came in. As a judge, I would have no problem sentencing anybody that broke into the Capitol, anything that committed a crime here. But let's be real, the partisanship has been dramatic. And that's why it's different now than the 9/11 Commission. Let's get back to being bipartisan and not use every tool as a partisan stick to beat Republicans with. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from the Virgin Islands, Ms. Plaskett, for 1 minute.
The gentlewoman from the Virgin Islands is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of this bill, the National Commission to investigate the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. I want to thank Chairman Thompson and Ranking Member Katko for bringing this bill to the floor. On January 6th, we witnessed one of the darkest moments in our nation's history when a violent mob attacked the U.S. Capitol. These individuals desecrated the halls of Congress, attacked law enforcement, and attempted to stop the democratic process. The clearest way for us to uphold our oath to defend the Constitution and protect this institution, our democracy, from those who directly attempt to thwart its operations is through an independent, evenly divided, bipartisan commission. We need to understand not just what were the breakdowns in security and failures of our intelligence, but why. What are those issues which caused fellow Americans to believe they needed to overthrow their government? Those who believe the former president had no culpability should not be afraid of a commission that derives its power from both sides equally. I ask all of my colleagues to join me in supporting this bill. I yield back and thank you.
Chairwoman yields back. Gentleman from Mississippi reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the Speaker. I thank the gentleman from New York for his work on this effort. I appreciate my colleagues on the other side of the aisle and the intent of what we're trying to accomplish. Obviously, we're all very concerned and should be concerned about what occurred on January 6th. All of us who are here in the chamber, all of us who saw what unfolded. My concern, and the reason that I'm opposing this legislation, is that I believe we've got a significant amount of power with our existing structures in place, with the committees and oversight, judiciary and otherwise, and well as investigations going on underway by the Department of Justice, that we ought to be looking at that and using those powers to do what we can now to seek the truth wherever it may lead. I have questions right now about Department of Justice, where we've got 450 Americans who've been arrested. I don't know for how long. I don't know how many of them are in jail for what period of time. We're trying to look into that. I've sent letters to DOJ to get those answers. I wish the gentlelady who spoke, the chair of the Oversight Committee, would afford us the ability to call people forward from the Department of Justice. Let's inquire as to what's going on. Let's inquire about the investigations. Let's inquire about the facts that have been found. Let's use the powers that we have and the powers of this body and the committees we have to seek the information and the truth wherever it may lead. I yield back.
Gentleman from Texas yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Schakowsky.
The gentlewoman from Illinois is recognized for 30 seconds.
I want to thank Chairman Thompson for his leadership. And while the events of January 6th were devastating and will stain our country's history forever, I have no doubt that democracy will prevail. This nation has fought back against hatred, authoritarianism, and fascism since the very founding. Yes, I stand proudly today to ask for a January 6th commission so that we can develop a full public record that will let us know how we can avoid this in the future. We should all vote yes. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Mississippi reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I just want to take a few moments to address some of the arguments that have been made here today. And some arguments have been made in opposition to this bill. One of them is talking about the scope of the commission being too narrow. I want to note that the commission is granted sufficient scope and flexibility to investigate targeted violence and domestic terrorism relevant to the January 6th attack. It will be up to the commission to decide how far they want to go with that imprimatur. Do I feel that the attack on the Capitol on April 2nd that killed a Capitol police officer is relevant? I do. I hope the commission does too. Do I feel that the June 17th attack on Republican members of Congress relevant to the January 6th attack is relevant? I do, and I hope the commission does. They have the flexibility to do so if they want. If there are other issues outside of this scope, we can look into them. We can have separate legislation, and I encourage my colleagues who are concerned about that to do that. And another charge I heard was that the commission could be controlled by partisan staff hired unilaterally by the commission chair. That is simply not true. Here's what the bill does. It requires consultation between the chair, appointed by the Democrats, and the vice chair, appointed by the Republicans, for any hiring of staff, and further requires that it be in accordance with rules agreed upon by the commission. The commission creates the rules as a team. Then they hire as a team. And lastly, there's been some concerns or arguments made about the criminal investigations. Make no mistake about it. This commission has nothing to do with the criminal investigations. This commission, by law, cannot interfere with criminal investigations. Criminal investigations alone won't get us what we need, like the 9/11 Commission concluded. It won't get us the recommendations, the insight, the expertise from the people on the commission who can come in, look at this Capitol security matrix and say, this is what needs fixing. A prosecutor can't tell you that. The commission can, and that's what we want to do. Second, the bill specifically requires the commission to respect ongoing investigations and build upon the investigations, learn from them, and avoid unnecessary duplication. This language, in that respect, goes further than the 9/11 Commission and H.R. 275 in granting deference to other ongoing investigations. So I just want to make sure people are clear about that going forward. I also want to make sure that at this time, I know for the record that I've reserved the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Ryan.
Gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
I want to thank the gentleman from New York and the other Republicans who are supporting this and thank them for their bipartisanship. To the other 90% of our friends on the other side of the aisle, holy cow. Incoherence. No idea what you're talking about. Benghazi, you guys chased the former Secretary of State all over the country, spent millions of dollars. We have people scaling the Capitol, hitting the Capitol Police with lead pipes across the head, and we can't get bipartisanship. What else has to happen in this country? Cops. This is a slap in the face to every rank and file cop in the United States. If we're going to take on China, if we're going to rebuild the country, if we're going to reverse climate change, we need two political parties in this country that are both living in reality, and you ain't one of them. I yield back the balance of my time.
Back the balance of his time. Members are reminded to direct their comments to the chair. The gentleman from Mississippi reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that we all take a deep breath right now. And everybody breathe for a minute. And everybody stop the theatrics. And everybody stop the arguments that are not relevant to this issue. This is a very solemn moment. We're here to talk about something that's very important to the entire of our government and the entire of our country. And I ask that we think about the officers and their families and conduct ourselves accordingly. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve. Mr. Speaker, I recognize the gentlelady from New Jersey for 30 minutes, Ms. Watson Coleman.
For 30 seconds. The gentlewoman from New Jersey is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you. Mr. Katko said I could have 5 more. I just want to say that January the 6th was a frightening experience. It was an assault upon the fundamentals of this government. It was an assault upon the place I thought I was going to be the safest I could possibly be. And we politicized this. This is an opportunity to bring this bipartisan commission into existence so that we can get out of the politics of it and look at the facts that happened, the evidence that happened, and the recommendations that will ensue from that effort. And so I wholeheartedly support this effort. I am grateful for the bipartisanship of it, and I pray that all of our colleagues will support this. I thank you, and I yield back.
Chairwoman yields back the balance of her time. Gentleman from Mississippi reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire as to how much time we have?
The gentleman from New York has 9.5 minutes. The gentleman from Mississippi has 1.5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I'm prepared to close. Mr. Speaker, this legislation is not about partisan politics. It's about finding the truth and addressing the vulnerabilities of our security apparatus so that we can emerge stronger and better prepared. The January 6th attack was a completely preventable failure of intelligence, information sharing, decision-making, and preparedness. And the Capitol Police and D.C. Police suffer greatly and continue to suffer as a result. The institutions of our democracy are and will continue to be a target for extremists set on using violence to further their ideology. And we in Congress owe it to this nation, to our constituents, and to the dedicated men and women who risk their lives every single day to protect those institutions. And I honor them. To see that we learn from those attacks, that we get answers to the hard questions, and that we do not repeat the mistakes of the past. Capitol Police officers Brian Sicknick and Howard Liebengood, as well as D.C. Police Officer Jeffrey Smith, all lost their lives in the wake of the January 6th attack. Over 140 more law enforcement officers, 140, were injured as a result of that attack. Less than 4 months later, on April 2nd, Capitol Police Officer William Billy Evans was killed, and another officer was injured when yet another extremist attacked the Capitol. And of course, we can't forget the 2017 terrorist attack against Republican members of Congress during practice for the congressional baseball game. Were it not for the officers involved, there would be scores of dead congressmen. That's the plain truth. I acknowledge the heroic efforts of Capitol Police officers David Bailey and Crystal Griner. We owe it to all of these officers and their families to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again. This legislation is modeled directly on the legislation that created the 9/11 Commission. I sincerely believe that this commission, with strong support from this body, will embark on an objective, nonpartisan search for answers and solutions, just as the 9/11 Commission did. And again, I want to thank my friend, Chairman Thompson, for his partnership. I urge all of you in the body, all of you on both sides, not just my side or not just your side, all of us, to set aside politics just this once. Just this once. I beg you, and pass this bill. I was a prosecutor for 20 years prior to coming here in Congress. And many times we'd meet at 4:30 in the morning or 5 in the morning, and they would get ready to go out and do the raids and arrest very, very dangerous people. And I was always the last people to see them before they went out to get these awful, dangerous people off the street. Drug dealers, murderers, violent people. They did their job every day, and I was sending them into harm's way, and it always made my heart sink. Imagine being a family member of these officers who do this. So let's take a deep breath and think about what's really important here. These people every single day are willing to lay down their lives for us. They deserve better. And we're going to deliver this. And we're going to deliver it on behalf of Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick. And we're going to deliver it on behalf of Capitol Police Officer Howard Liebengood. And we're going to deliver it on behalf of Capitol Police Officer William Billy Evans. And we're going to deliver it on behalf of D.C. Police Officer Jeffrey Smith. And we're going to deliver it on behalf of D.C. Officer Michael Fanone and so many others who struggled with the events of that day. And we do so on behalf of the people who risked their lives for us and continue, like Police Officer David Bailey and Capitol Police Officer Crystal Griner. I want these officers and their families to know that we are doing it not for us and not for politics. We are doing it for them. We're doing it for them. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of time. Gentleman from New York, Mr. Katko. Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And let me, at the outset, salute Mr. Katko for his agreeing to work in a bipartisan manner so that we get this bill to the floor and adopt it today. Mr. Speaker, we're here today at a unique moment in American history. Trust in our government's ability to share information and coordinate at all levels to keep our democracy secure was severely shaken by the January 6th attack. We need a bipartisan commission with experts who put country ahead of party to come together just as the 9/11 Commission did to lay out the facts and propose solutions to make us more secure. When the chairman of the 9/11 Commission issued their final report, they concluded a message to the public. It asks that each of us remember how we felt on that day of the attack. It asks that we recall the grief and sorrow. This moment is no less historic, no less important, no less momentous, and it requires the same common action, both as Congress and as a country. And I too salute the brave men and women of the Capitol Police who put their lives on the line on January 6th, protecting this citadel of democracy. And it's in their spirit that I ask that you vote in support of this legislation. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. All time has expired pursuant to House Resolution 409. The previous question is order on the bill. The question is on the engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
to establish the National Commission to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol complex and for other purposes.
The question is on the passage of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The bill is passed without objection. Motion. Gentleman from New York.
I ask for the yeas and nays.
Pursuant to Section 3S of House Resolution 8, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to a question of the privileges of the House and send to the desk House Resolution 414, directing the attending physician to provide updated mask-wearing guidance.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 414, whereas the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention issued a guidance on March 13, 2021, stating that Americans who are fully vaccinated against COVID-19 no longer need to wear a mask indoors or outdoors in almost all scenarios, whereas the 3 widely available vaccines against COVID-19 are highly effective, whereas Dr. Anthony Fauci, stated on May 16th that it is very unlikely that a vaccinated person, even if there's a breakthrough infection, would transmit it to someone else, whereas those who are fully vaccinated are shown not to carry the viral load necessary to spread the virus and therefore do not pose a significant risk, whereas those who have not yet received the vaccine pose no real threat to those who have been vaccinated, whereas there may be members of the House of Representatives whose personal physician, for various reasons, may recommend that they do not receive the vaccine, whereas those who want to continue wearing a mask or taking other forms of precaution may do so, whereas members of the House of Representatives have a responsibility to send a message to the American people that we can trust the safety and efficacy of the available COVID-19 vaccines, whereas the continued House mask mandate sends the erroneous message that the efficacy of the vaccines cannot be trusted, whereas the continued House mask mandate is not based on the best available science and contrary to the latest CDC guidance, and is not in line with the protocols in place in the United States Senate and at the White House. And whereas the continued House mask mandate hinders the ability of the House to properly and effectively conduct the people's business, now therefore be it resolved that the attending physician, in consultation with the Director for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, should take timely action to provide updated mask-wearing guidance applicable to the Hall of the House of Representatives and committee meeting spaces for members and staff who are vaccinated against COVID-19, consistent with the public guidance released by the CDC on May 13, 2021.
The resolution qualifies. For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland rise?
I have a motion at the desk.
The clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Hoyer of Maryland moves to lay the resolution on the table.
The question is on the motion to lay the resolution on the table. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Gentleman from California.
The yeas and nays, Mr. Speaker.
Pursuant to Section 3S of House Resolution 8, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
Member dissented by Representative Cardenas. Pursuant to H.R. 8, I inform the House that Representative Cardenas will vote yea on the motion to table. On that one.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Maxine Waters pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Ms. Maxine Waters will vote yes on the motion to table.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
As the member designated by Chairwoman Eddie Bernice Johnson pursuant to H. Res. 8, I inform the House that Chairwoman Johnson will vote yea on the motion to table.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Lawson of Florida, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Lawson will vote yes on the motion to table.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. McEachin pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. McEachin will vote.
Virginia seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. McEachin pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. McEachin will vote yes on the motion to table. And as the member designated by Mr. Allred pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Allred will vote yes on the motion to table.
Michigan? New Jersey. New Jersey? Oh, no, I'm sorry. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, as a member designated by Ms. Joyce Beatty, designated pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Joyce Beatty will vote yes on the motion to table.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Mullen of Oklahoma, pursuant to H.R. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Mullen will vote nay on the motion to table. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does the gentlewoman from Illinois seek recognition?
As the member designated by Mr. Rush, pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Rush will vote yes on the motion to table.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Crenshaw of Texas, pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Crenshaw will vote nay on the motion to table.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Grijalva pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Grijalva will vote yea on the motion to table.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Sewell pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Ms. Sewell will vote yes on the motion to table.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Buchanan of Florida pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Buchanan will vote no on House Resolution 414.
back. That's good. For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. McHenry of North Carolina pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. McHenry will vote no on the motion to table.
Purpose does the gentlewoman from Connecticut seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Wilson pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Wilson will vote yes on the motion to table.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Congressmember Napolitano pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Congressmember Napolitano will vote yes on the motion to table.
What state is she from? For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Iowa seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Slotkin pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Slotkin will vote yes on the motion to table.
What? South Carolina seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Wilson in South Carolina pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Wilson will vote nay on the motion to table.
Does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Donald Payne pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Payne will vote yes on the motion to table.
Purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
As the member designated by Mr. Rupersberger of Maryland pursuant to House Resolution 8, I rise to announce to the House that Mr. Rupersberger will vote aye on the motion to table.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Kirkpatrick, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Kirkpatrick will vote yes on the motion to table.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Deutsch of Florida pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Deutsch will vote yes on the motion to table.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Liu pursuant to H.R.S. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Liu will vote yes on the motion to table. As the member designated by Mr. Lowenthal pursuant to H.R.S. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Lowenthal will vote yes on the motion to table.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
As a member designated by Mr. Carter of Texas pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Carter will vote no on the motion to table.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Young from Alaska, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Young will vote nay on the motion to table.
Missouri. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Missouri seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Ocasio-Cortez pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Cortez will vote yes on the motion to table.
On this vote, the yeas are 217 and the nays are 209. The motion is adopted. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the this vote.
Mr. Austin Scott of Georgia votes no.
On this vote, the yeas are 218 and the nays are 210. The motion is adopted. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on passage of H.R. 3233, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 3233, a bill to establish the National Commission to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol complex and for other purposes.
The question is on passage of the bill. Members will record their vote by electronic device. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Vern Buchanan pursuant to House Rule 8, I inform the House that Mr. Buchanan will vote no on House Rule 3233.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Virginia seek recognition?
As the member designated by Mr. McEachin pursuant to H. Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. McEachin will vote yes on H.R. 3233. And as the member designated by Mr. Allred pursuant to H. Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Allred will vote yes on H.R. 3233.
For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Wilson in South Carolina pursuant to H. Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Wilson will vote nay on H.R. 3233.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Kirkpatrick, pursuant to H. Res. 8, I inform the House that Ms. Kirkpatrick will vote yes on H.R. 3233.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
As a member designated by Mr. Carter of Texas, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Carter will vote no on H.R. 3233.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Congressmember Napolitano, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Congressmember Napolitano will vote yes on H.R. 3233.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Crenshaw of Texas pursuant to H. Res. 8, I inform the House Mr. Crenshaw will vote no on H.R. 3233.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Grijalva of Arizona pursuant to H. Res. 8, I hereby inform the House that Mr. Grijalva will vote aye on H.R. 3233.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Mullen of Oklahoma pursuant to H.R. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Mullen will vote no on H.R. 3233. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Connecticut seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Wilson pursuant to H. Res. 8, I inform the House that Ms. Wilson will vote yes on H.R. 3233.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. McHenry of North Carolina pursuant to H. Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. McHenry will vote no on H.R. 3233.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Iowa seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Slotkin pursuant to H. Res. 8, I inform the House that Ms. Slotkin will vote yes on H.R. 3233.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Young from Alaska, pursuant to H. Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Young will vote nay on H.R. 3233.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Donald Payne pursuant to H. Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Payne will vote yes on H.R. 3233.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Deutsch of Florida pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Deutsch will vote yes on H.R. 3233.
Purpose does the gentlewoman from Missouri seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Ocasio-Cortez pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Cortez will vote yes on H.R. 3233.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Lawson of Florida pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Lawson votes yes on final passage.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Maxine Waters pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Ms. Maxine Waters will vote yes on H.R. 3233.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Sewell, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Sewell will vote yes on H.R. 3233.
Does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Liu pursuant to H.R. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Liu will vote yes on H.R. 3233. As the member designated by Mr. Lowenthal pursuant to H.R. 8, I inform the House Mr. Lowenthal will vote yes on H.R. 3233.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Joyce Beatty pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Joyce Beatty will vote yes on H.R. 3233.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
As the member designated by Chairwoman Eddie Bernice Johnson pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Chairwoman Johnson will vote yea on H.R. 3233.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
As a member designated by Representative Cardenas pursuant to H.R. 8, I inform the House that Representative Cardenas will vote aye on H.R. 3233.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Illinois seek recognition?
As a member designated by Mr. Rush pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Rush will vote yes on H.R. 3233.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Rupersberger of Maryland pursuant to House Resolution 8, I rise to inform the House that Mr. Rupersberger votes aye on H.R. 3233.
On this vote, the yeas are 252, the nays are 175. The bill is passed. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
Sorry now? Take off my hat. The chair will announce that on roll call number 149, the following correction will be made. The gentleman from Washington, Mr. Smith, is recorded as voting aye, bringing the number of aye votes to 245. Men from Louisiana? House will be in order? Yep. Majority chart. Yep. House will be in order. Can I call him now? Okay. Sorry. The chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On this somber occasion, we rise to honor the late Buddy Roemer. He was born in Shreveport, Louisiana in 1943. He was a Harvard-educated reformer with big ideas. He represented Louisiana's 4th Congressional District here in the House from 1981 to 1988. He served as the 52nd governor of Louisiana, and he was a former candidate for President of the United States. He passed away at the age of 77 on May 17, 2021. Please join us in a moment of silence in honor of his public service and his important contributions to Louisiana and our nation.
Your time has expired.
Thank you.
Where is she? It's this house will be in order. Thank you. This house will be in order.